Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The-Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Stephan Loerke, the Chief Executive Officer of the WFA, or the World Federation of Advertisers. Welcome to the show. It's always such a pleasure to spend time with you, even if it is virtual.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, indeed a pleasure. But before we start with your thoughts on the year ahead in marketing, why don't we turn to something that you said? You actually mentioned that 2021 was a watershed year for marketing. Could you tell us why?
Yeah, I think 2021 was a watershed year for marketers in a number of important respects. It was clearly a very challenging year. Many have tended to want to write it off. I have a different view. I think actually 2021 was an important year. I think 2021 was the year where the industry progressed very significantly on some of the key defining topics. And therefore, I think it was actually an important year. Not just to cite a few important step changes we've seen. Look at the climate agenda. I think the climate agenda is, for our industry and for our society at large, the mother of all battles. It's going to be redefining the way we do marketing and the way we live in the coming years. And marketers have started to step up. Marketers were present at COP26. WFA launched its Planet Pledge. We have now 22 of the world's most influential CMOs who've signed up to be leading on the climate agenda in their companies. So I think we've seen a very substantial progress in the way marketing and marketers look at the climate challenge. I'd like to mention also diversity inclusion. We're all looking at how the industry is going to be navigating the talent shortage challenge that is in front of us. Diversity inclusion is going to be one of the defining factors for the attractiveness of employers and for our industry at large. We ran the first ever global survey of the ad industry with respect to diversity and inclusion. So we had more than 10,000 respondents describe how they felt in terms of inclusivity and in terms of diversity in their workplaces across 27 different countries. So we now finally have a benchmark against which we're going to be able to measure whether we as an industry are progressing on this important matter. Also want to highlight the progress we're making on cross-media measurement. We've struggled for so many years. The marketers have been loud in complaining about the fact that measurement was not up to the challenges and the transformation our industry goes through. We now have a cross-media measurement agenda, pilot projects which are being readied for launch both in the UK and the US, probably still in 2022, which are really encouraging and exciting because they're going to be unlocking a whole different way of holding ourselves accountable and measuring progress. So I could go on, but I think there have been a number of very significant changes in the way we as an industry address our agenda. And although we don't know what 2022 has in store for us, I do think that the industry is actually in a better place in terms of resilience, in terms of openness, in terms of its ability to embrace the challenge of climate, and therefore I want to be confident as we look at 2022.
Well, I know that you always talk about how you're an optimist, but I think 2021 proved that you were a very busy optimist. But there's a couple of things that you mentioned, and obviously the three issues in particular that you outlined will go in and will continue into 2022. Let's just, if you don't mind, talk a little bit more about some of those issues. Let's just look a little bit more at climate and the WFA Planet Pledge. Congratulations on 22 CMOs signing up to take the pledge. But I also know that you did some research earlier in 2021 about marketing and sustainability. And as I recall, one of the findings, one of the many findings, was that there are some marketers that don't exactly know where to start. So could you share some of your advice on that, since you've really dug deep in 2021 on these climate issues?
Yeah, so I should be saying that we ran this global survey on marketing and sustainability in order to understand where CMOs were on this subject. And the sort of first interesting finding is the vast majority of global marketing leaders consider that they have a role to play when it comes to sustainability. We're talking about 92% of interviewed global marketers. And, and that actually is very similar to what consumers think marketers should be doing. So it's interesting that no, we're starting from a position where consumers are expecting it, and marketers recognize that they have a role to play. Now, what's the reason? Why is there still a gap between that expectation and the reality of where marketers are today? And so we've identified one major obstacle, which we call the marketing conundrum, the consumption conundrum, if you want. Many marketers consider that marketing is part of a societal model or an economic model that drives growth. Growth, as we've known it so far, has proven to be unsustainable for the planet, and therefore, marketing is probably going to be part of the problem in the minds of a number of marketing leaders. That's what we've called the consumption conundrum, which in some cases holds back marketers from taking action. When we then dig deeper in terms of where exactly are the pain points, what is actually holding back marketers, there are three things we've identified in particular. One is an organizational challenge. Many companies are still looking at how and where the responsibility for sustainability and for the sustainability agenda should sit in the organization. Some have opted for self-standing function, others have integrated it in a more global marketing role. And there is still a lot of hesitation in terms of what's the best setup. And therefore, marketers aren't fully sure whether that is part of their remit or whether it's another part of the organization that is in charge of it. That's what we call the organizational challenge. There is clearly an upskilling challenge. We have noted that a very significant part of the marketing community isn't actually sufficiently briefed on the sustainability challenges and how that intersects with the marketing role. So there's a very significant urge to train marketing teams in terms of sustainability and the role of marketers in that field. And then the third challenge is a metrics challenge. Marketers aren't exactly sure first of all, how to set objectives and then how to measure progress with respect to sustainability. And that can also hold back organizations in the way they embrace that agenda. So that's really the background to our Planet Pledge and the sort of framework commitment that we've launched, which is actually really building on the conclusions of the research which I just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that any time that you can provide greater education, you can move that from marketers who obviously have a natural product or brand that's involved in sustainable actions, and broaden it to marketers who start to believe that the power of marketing can create change. So I know that is a massive, a massive project for you. But you also mentioned another project that sounds awfully massive to me, with the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, in that you said 27 countries and over 3,000 respondents. I took a quick look at some of the top line notes, and I was really intrigued by how countries varied, how perceptions in many ways varied per country. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you did say that might be an answer to some of the talent issues or the great resignation issues.
Yeah. So I mean, this initiative in 2021 is actually the largest ever ad industry collaboration effort we've seen in history. It actually included all the largest global ad industry organizations, from Cannes Lions to International Advertising Association to Adweek, to 4A's, Voxcom. I mean, you name them. No, they all basically teamed, and we included also 160 local advertising associations in this. So it's a massive effort, and a hugely challenging one too, because you know that legal frameworks are very different all around the world when it comes to surveying people on diversity issues, as you can imagine. So it was quite an undertaking, but we're very proud to have pulled it off, and I think the learnings are absolutely essential for the future of our industry. Now, to your question, how does that link to the talent challenge? Now, 1 in 7 globally, out of the 10,000 responses, 1 in 7 is considering resigning from their company and from the ad industry because of the diversity inclusion issue, because of a lack of perceived inclusivity and diversity. So you just put that into context of the great resignation we're going through, and you see how that could potentially affect very significantly many parts of our industry. But this is not only, of course, a question of how to say, future talent management of our industry. This is most importantly about understanding whether our industry is actually living up to its values and to what it advocates as an industry in public. So we've taken a stance on diversity and inclusion that is very robust, where we say that this is an important issue, we want to embrace it, we want to be using marketing as a force for good, etc., etc. Here we're looking at, are we practicing what we preach? I mean, how is the reality of working in the ad industry today? And so we had people respond anonymously to a questionnaire across 27 countries. And those 27 countries aren't, how to say, necessarily the same. You have on the one hand the US, and then you have Malaysia, you have Singapore, you have Japan, you have a huge variety, cultural, economic, social variety of countries, which were included in that survey. And there are some very interesting parallels, but there are also very, very important discrepancies. Let me just say one thing, is when we ran the survey, global survey, we were very clear from the very beginning that we didn't want this to be a ranking of nations. That would be totally wrong. That would be utterly simplistic. It would not acknowledge the very important economic, social, religious factors that are at play here. So we don't want anyone to look at this as a ranking exercise. However, we want countries to have a very honest photography of where they stand today. And we want countries to be able to learn from others in terms of how they can do better. That's the only purpose. It's really empowering countries to progress, help them understand where they are, set a benchmark, and then empower them to make progress. Is not about ranking countries, and this is why we haven't published any full ranking of countries. We will reserve the country results to each of the countries, but we will support them in terms of them putting in place action plans to get better. Let me say a few words in terms of some of the important findings of the survey. One is the main factors of perceived discrimination are age and family status. That's really interesting because they don't necessarily feature that visibly or that highly in the public debate, but they are very much the perceived, very important perceived obstacles to diversity and inclusion. Of course, gender and ethnicity, play a very important role, but family and age, family status and age come out on top. Now, of course, there are intersectionalities, and so you look at, for example, family status or age, and you look at what that means, for example, for women ethnic origins, and then you see how intersectionalities can actually make the perceived discrimination even bigger. So a very rich and important findings there in terms of the perceived lack of diversity and inclusion. Also to note that there are real differences in terms of lived experiences, whether you're man or woman, around the world, there are despite all those pretty challenging results, our industry, our sector, came out on top of all the other sectors that Kantar measured through its inclusion measurement index. So despite the fact that the marketing industry has still a long way to go, we're actually scoring better than technology, retail, finance, etc. So by no means that should be by no means a reason to celebrate, but it puts it into perspective. So we have huge challenges in front of us, but there are sectors which have even more on their hands in terms of getting where they need to be.
No, I agree with you, and I was pleasantly surprised when I looked at some of the highlights about lived experiences and also about some of that interconnectedness. And so often we think of DEI as issues of race or disadvantage, and it certainly is. But I think that you've broadened it to so many ways of rethinking this. Let me. Obviously, climate and DEI will, as we said, be with us for the foreseeable future. I'm just wondering, since you've had so many solutions or you've tackled so many challenges in 2021, what you might see ahead as some of the issues that you'd like to tackle as a global organization in the coming year. As I say, you're obviously well on your way to hitting some of the major points, but is there anything else that is really concerning you as an industry issue?
Yes, I would add to the agenda we just mentioned. I would add data ethics. We are talking about, until now, the industry has very much been focused on legal frameworks and how they apply or don't apply. Think about GDPR, CCPA in California, etc. Data ethics is a much broader theme. It's about it's not about whether it's legal or not. It's whether would it be right to be using data in a manner that is not yet legislated. So increasingly, both in terms of data collection and data usage, CMOs have the opportunity of leveraging that data wealth for marketing strategies in a manner that was impossible in the past. Those decisions are often made purely as technical decisions, no? But those decisions have a huge ethical dimension too. But today there's no law in place, and some countries, some companies are now putting in place ethical frameworks in order to help guide decisions. So we're at the very beginning of this, but it's going to be incumbent on the industry to make sure that we pass the red face test in terms of the data collection and data usage, given that technology is outpacing regulators by such a margin. So data ethics is going to be, for us, an important theme we're going to be looking at in 2022. Yeah, and then of course, it wouldn't be complete without mentioning the dialogue with platforms. The 2021 has been the whistleblower year in many respects. We've been taken aback by a number of revelations. Some of them are related to content monetization and therefore fully fall into our remit. To which extent is it acceptable that brands appear next to certain types of content, and what do we do to make sure that this doesn't happen and that platforms are being held accountable for brands? But then there are all the other issues around content moderation, so what type of content should be allowed onto platforms or not. Also questions around mental health, around algorithmic transparency, and other very important societal issues that clearly would fall under the remit of legislators. And we're starting to see legislators, whether it's in the EU, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in the UK, starting to take action. But so the platform safety question is certainly going to be very present in 2022.
Oh, that's a lot. I mean, that's not easy when you start to think about issues before they can be legislated. I mean, that is pretty interesting, and maybe data ethics should be part of the new ESG. Maybe we need to figure out a D in there too, because it does relate very much to issues of transparency and also consumer privacy and so many knock-on effects. There's so much to run through, and maybe we can just do these in very much of a fast-paced fashion. But I did take a look at some of your predictions for 2022. There's one I would really like to start with because, like everything else, there's been a little bit of pushback on it. And you do talk about 2022 will continue to incorporate, shall we call it, purpose-led thinking. I think you know enough about me that that's an area that I'm very much focused on. But I do think that there's a lot of purpose washing, and we've heard some voices out there saying that the purpose of a company is to make money. Don't pretend it's something else. Although we do live in different times. So I'm just wondering if this will always be a topic that evolves, or do you think people need it more in as we get out of this COVID crisis? Or I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So first of all, let me say that there's of course controversy around purpose. It has been a big debate in our industry now for a number of years. There has been purpose washing, no doubt. But the reason why purpose is still there is that consumers are increasingly challenging brands and are asking exactly that question. So increasingly, consumers are not only looking at products from a functional perspective, they're increasingly asking questions in terms of how that product has been produced and the values that the company is abiding by. So it's really the consumer and the change in the consumer expectations that has actually put purpose on the agenda of marketers. Some do it authentically, others do purpose washing at times. But I don't expect this to disappear anytime soon. What I like to say is, I don't want to be naive. Clearly, some companies are positioning themselves in a manner that that isn't necessarily authentic. But I'd like to take it. I'd like to take a positive approach to purpose in marketing. The fact that marketers start asking us the questions in terms of how they're positioning themselves with respect to big societal expectations and demands is per se, I think, a positive thing. Now, the way they translate it and the way they live by it needs to be looked at, and I think consumers in 2022 are not forgiving, and they are probably much more how should I say, cynical at times, and certainly more demanding than they've been in the past. But I'd like to overall welcome the fact that brand marketers do challenge themselves in terms of purpose and look at where they position themselves. I think overall that's a good thing for society. Now, I would hope that this appetite for purpose, we can translate it into meaningful action. And I still think that as an industry, we have quite a few examples where we can show that that we're moving the needle. But I think overall purpose is there to stay, and I would rather welcome it rather than hope it went away. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, and I think I think that some of the companies who have been dedicated to this for a while might be leading the way, in terms of looking at perhaps new business models or even ways of collaborating meaningfully, whether it is with charities or non-governmental organizations. I mean, it's more than that, but I think you talk to actions, and I think we might see, some real movement as consumers tend now to trust business more than they do government. So I mean, that's a whole new area. Let me just ask you very quickly of to talk about three things in your predictions, and two might be related. One was, of course, meta mania, and you also do talk about how gaming and esports, and maybe they're not, obviously they're not the same, but you can see how they can be characterized a little bit together. I know you've done a little bit of work on demystifying gaming for brands, and we're seeing so many other brands now get into that space. And then I'd also love you to talk about something that I'm intrigued by, which is the golden square. So go ahead, let's just roll through that, and maybe we'll come back and visit them in more detail too. Yeah.
So metamania, it's related to the metaverse and among other things, the rebranding of Facebook and this perspective of a virtual world in which we'd have avatars and increasingly blur the physical and the virtual world in a manner that will open whole new opportunities for brands. That creates a lot of excitement in our industry. Now, interesting, we're picking up a lot of excitement actually in Asia. We're seeing a lot of excitement around the world, but in Asia in particular. And one of the reasons why that's the case is I was looking at figures in China. The Chinese are actually particularly excited about the metaverse, even more so than the UK and the US. So I think we're talking about 85% of Chinese between 18 and 40 saying that they're excited about the metaverse, and those percentages are significantly higher than they are in the UK and the US. And then the second question in terms of what they're expecting from the metaverse, whether they see it as a positive or a negative development. Again, the percentages of Chinese who say they look forward to it and they see more positive is higher in China. So I think that's probably creating a sort of momentum in Asia on metaverse that is really interesting to look at. Now, gaming esports is something that we moved into in 2019. And so we ran a first survey, and we just issued a follow-up survey. When we published it in 2019, 18% of brand marketers felt they were familiar with esports and gaming. When we ran the second survey 3 years later, that percentage has moved to 44. Now, why is there such an excitement around esports and gaming? Now, first response, of course, the COVID pandemic. Imagine that has been quite an accelerator. People have spent just more time at home, and gaming and esports have accelerated even more. But it's also longer term, an opportunity for brands to connect with a demographic that is very difficult to connect with, which is 18 to 40 years old, tech-savvy demographic, which is very present in gaming. 70% of Gen Zs consider gaming to be an important part of their identity. So you see the level of passion there is. And for brands not to be looking at gaming and esports today means actually not leveraging a very significant opportunity to connect with that demographic. So that's probably also one of the reasons why that fuels the interest.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about that golden square.
So there's been a golden triangle for a long time, and that is actually media, finance, procurement. That's the gold triangle that shapes the decision in marketing. Now that square is increasingly becoming that triangle increasingly becomes a square because there's a fourth player in there, which is the marketing insights role. Marketing insights is a role that has evolved very, very fast in recent years. So insights people have moved from the role of librarian or caddy, if you want, no, to if I had to sort of caricature it, to the role of a strategic advisor, no, because of the availability of data and because of the new research methodologies, which puts puts the insights role in a position to have a true place at the table when it comes to strategic decisions. It's going to be, it's increasingly, that insights role brings to the conversation a very important perspective on opportunities in the future. And so we're advocating very much that type of leadership role in the insights function, for it to be truly become an equal partner in that square. And if we're able to build that square, I think we're going to be able to build a marketing decision-making process that is going to be of a better quality. And so that's very much why we've reinvigorated our marketing insights group in WFA. And I can see a lot of momentum behind that role and that new vision of the insights role in the organization. So that's why we're moving from a triangle to a square and a goal.
All right. As long as it's not Squid Game, we're good. We're good. Well, we've talked a lot about the industry going forward. Just quickly, what's next for the WFA? I know that you have your Global Marketer Week in Athens in April. What's next on your agenda?
So let me first say that we're absolutely determined to hold our Global Marketer Week in Athens in April. Now, of course, we don't know how the pandemic is going to evolve, but we're determined. And so we'll put in place all the measures needed so that people can finally come together, because I think that's desperately needed in our industry. We've talked about all those transformational changes that we've gone through the last 2 years. People need to come together in order to connect, in order to make sense of all those changes. And I think that's going to be a very important moment to re-energize the community. So what's next for WFA? Look, I think there's one term which I think is going to be really important in 2022, and that's creativity. Our industry's creativity has suffered in recent years. It doesn't date back the last 2 years, it dates back the last 10 years, as you know. If you want, as digital has gone up in terms of importance of media, we've seen creativity come down. There's plenty of research available that demonstrates that creativity has been suffering. And actually, when you think about the challenges we're faced with as an industry, think about climate. Sir Attenborough at our Global Marketing Week last year said the climate challenge is a communications challenge. When you think about many of those challenges in front of us, they will require creativity. When you think about the uncertainty in front of us, who knows how 2022 will turn out? It's going to require creativity in the way marketing will connect with consumers, and the way marketing will use its skills to embrace those big challenges. So I think that's going to be a big theme for us in 2022.
So if I asked you for one word or phrase that would characterize the coming year, would it be creativity?
Yeah, because I think I would use that because first of all, I want to put a positive spin on that uncertainty. I think that's the one thing our industry can bring to the table, and that makes it so valuable, to society at large. And that's what we excel at, and that's what we need to be reinvigorating.
Well, that's a very big agenda, but I have no doubt, given what you've accomplished in difficult times and the energy that you put forward on all of this, that it's something that we're going to see change, thanks to you. So with that, I look forward to talking more. There's so many topics that I'm sure you can share a global view on, and I really look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. Thank you. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories.